Our U.S. political panel is here to weigh in on all of the developments this week. Joining us is Paul Brandus of the West Wing Reports and Luiza Savage of Politico, both in our Washington studio. Good morning to you both. This is just wild. It is just wild. Okay, so let's start with the Republican race. Luiza, how big do you think Ted Cruz's wins were yesterday?
I think they were huge for him. I think now it's hard to make the case that Marco Rubio is the alternative to Trump. It's now 80% of the delegates are between Trump and Cruz, and very few are with Rubio. So this is close to a knockout punch for Rubio. He's going to have to really scramble hard now to show that he is relevant in this race.
Paul, what do you think? Is this big for Ted Cruz?
I think so, and for Rubio, when you only win 1 out of 17 races, which is his record so far, I think the voters have made their judgment. So Rubio is on the verge of collapse. Every week the story changes here. Rubio's on the verge of collapse. Cruz now is surging, and the fact is that Donald Trump has only won 2 out of 7 caucus states. He does much better in primaries where Democrats and independents can cross over and vote. So the concern is that he is not winning as he should be among Republican voters. There is just a rising apprehension about him. I was at a dinner last night, by the way, and a Canadian gentleman said, if Trump wins, we're going to build a wall. I mean, there's so much fear about him on this side of the border and perhaps on yours as well. And I think that is reflected in the way these last round of voting has gone.
Well, that concern within the Republican establishment, Paul, certainly over Donald Trump, seems to be growing by the day. This week we saw a familiar face try to take it down. Have a look.
Donald Trump is a phony, a fraud. His domestic policies would lead to recession. His foreign policies would make America and the world less safe. He has neither the temperament nor the judgment to be president.
So that was, of course, former Republican presidential nominee Mitt Romney attacking Trump this week. Paul, I don't know why, but when I saw Mitt Romney do this, the first thing that came to my mind was this is just going to embolden Trump supporters. It could even create more Trump supporters because Mitt Romney is the face of the Republican establishment, and there are a lot of Americans that are rejecting that right now.
Well, look, Donald Trump is a guy who's taken on the Bush family. He's taken on the Pope. I don't think he was exactly quivering in his boots at the prospect of Mitt Romney taking him on. It's the kind of thing that will only solidify his support among these hardcore folks who just seem to love him. But look, the fact is, after Romney made that speech, John McCain, the nominee in 2008, piled on. I mean, these are high-value, prestigious figures, the statesmen of the Republican Party, statesman after statesman, national security figures, economists. I mean, it's a very long list of people who are just piling on against Trump. But that being said, there are a wide swath of voters out there who simply don't care and will vote for him no matter what.
You know, Luiza, what's interesting about this is a lot of people think of Donald Trump as way right, but on some issues, like he's said he's in favor of Canadian-style socialized health care. He has issues with certain free trade agreements. So while he has said he has been a racist and a bigot and misogynist, you know, he's a little bit kind of all over the map. That's not the case necessarily with Ted Cruz, right? Ted Cruz is definitely right-wing, and sometimes we forget to focus on the policies because we're watching the circus.
Well, I think that's Ted Cruz's entire argument, and that's why he's picking up some steam, is he's saying to the Republican Party, Trump's not a conservative. He's not with us on so many of the issues that are behind the reasons we want to win the White House, right? So he's now coalescing that sort of ideological conservative part of the party. The thing with Ted Cruz is, I mean, this is creating just the absolute nightmare for the Republican establishment because they don't like Ted Cruz either. They consider him too much of an ideologue, too inflexible. I mean, he almost brought down he had the government closed, shut down over his opposition to Obama's health care reforms. And that was not at all what Republicans on the Hill wanted. They wanted to show they could govern and not just obstruct. So he's not he's not a happy alternative for the establishment Republicans either, but he is at least on the same side with them in terms of conservative ideologies and the issues that matter to him. And now with this opening on the Supreme Court, which is hugely important to the future of many, many policies in the United States, at least they know the kind of judge he would appoint to the Supreme Court. So I think that's helping Cruz a lot right now with hardcore, real, committed Republicans and conservatives in the party.
And Paul, can you remind us of where Ted Cruz stands on a few of these important issues, where he is in terms of that ideology?
Well, Ted Cruz, no question, as Luiza said, this is a far-right politician. He is hardcore, he says, on everything from immigration to abortion to all of these social issues, guns, and this kind of thing. The problem is for him, if he were to get the nomination, you have to move to the center to win a general election. That's what Romney did 4 years ago. Of course, didn't quite work out. So the question is, Ted Cruz has spent a year saying that he is a true hardcore 100% conservative. The problem for him is, again, how much can he move to the center where most of the voters in this country are? 2 out of 5 voters in the United States define themselves as independents. They could go either way. So Cruz, if he were to get the nomination, would have to do one heck of a persuasion job in getting those folks to vote for him. And the problem is, by the way, if the Republicans were to nominate Trump and he were to lose in November, that would give conservatives an excuse to say, look, we didn't nominate somebody conservative enough going into the next cycle. So Cruz may, in fact, be their only alternative.
All right, well, this Republican infighting is just the tip of the iceberg. Thursday's debate had some insults that, let's say, went below the belt. Here's a quick look.
This little guy has lied so much.
Here we go. So if there's anyone who's ever deserved to be attacked that way, it's been Donald Trump.
And he referred to my hands. If they're small, something else must be small. I guarantee you there's no problem.
Okay, so Luiza, I don't know. It's just, you hear this and it's, I almost feel as though I'm in a parallel universe sometimes when I hear these things. I can't believe it. Did you ever think that this discussion, this level of the vulgarity would take this kind of a turn? It just seems to be getting worse and worse.
I mean, it just keeps dropping to new lows. It's incredible. I think in the past when Barack Obama said to Hillary Clinton, "You're likable enough, Hillary," everyone gasped, and that was seen as such an insult. And now here we are. I mean, I'm just not sure how he can keep shocking us at this point. I think that was an incredible debasement of the process. But also, in that same debate, he said some other outrageous things, such as that he would, command the U.S. military to go after the families of terrorists and things that are clearly against international law, against the law of war. That, to my mind, was even more outrageous than talking about his anatomy. So he had to go back and walk that back a little bit. But this is clearly a man who will say absolutely anything and just has no shame, it seems.
Mm-hmm. And Paul, is it our fault in the media because, we hear these things and then we start focusing on it and it distracts us? Do we bear some responsibility? Maybe should we just be backing away? We're getting some pushback here, by the way, from a lot of our viewers saying that they feel as though we shouldn't even be covering Trump to the extent that we do.
Well, that's a whole nother discussion, but I think there's no question that the media is attracted to drama, bright, shiny objects, and conflict, and that apparently helps bring in the money. It draws ratings, and there's no question that these Republican debates, the ratings have been gigantic. There was the president of CBS, one of the big television networks here, said the other day, and he got a little bit of hot water for this. He said, look, I think Trump is bad for America, man, but he's really good for our bottom line. The money is just rolling in. And I think that speaks for itself. And Trump understands this. I mean, he's a carnival barker and a showman, and he's playing to his audience, but he's debasing the political process in an extremely gross way. And I think there's going to be some long-term damage here, whether he wins or loses or not. He's dropped the standards so low that I just don't know how much lower they can get.
Welcome back as we continue our discussion with our U.S. political panel, Paul Brandus and Luiza Savage. So last night, we saw some interesting wins. I don't know how significant. I'll get you guys to weigh in on that. With Bernie Sanders winning 2 states yesterday. Clinton, though, still has a commanding lead. So, Paul, where does that leave us?
Well, Clinton is still is undeniably still the front runner. She has the lion's share of delegates, including the superdelegates that you referred to in a prior segment. And at this point, she continues to run strong. She's getting a lot more momentum. And her strongest state last night was in Louisiana. No surprise, big numbers of African-American voters there. And that appears to be the pattern. So she is doing quite well. And the problem for Sanders is that he has yet to show that he can really cut into her lead with these minority voters. As I mentioned before, he's going to stick around in the race, though, despite these problems, because he's bringing in a ton of money. He brought in more than she did last month. And there are also concerns about what could happen to Mrs. Clinton on the legal front, too, regarding the FBI and this so-called email scandal. So he has plenty of reason, I think, to stick around.
Luiza?
Well, I agree with that. I think Bernie Sanders has outperformed anything he could have imagined when he first entered into this race. And he's here making his points. He's raising the issues of Wall Street reform, of campaign finance reform. He's energizing a lot of young people to get into politics. What he's not doing is expanding his supporters beyond the very liberal white voters and very young voters. He's not able to crack that Democratic coalition of African-American voters that is so necessary to winning the election, and they keep voting for Hillary Clinton. So he's doing well in the states where there are caucuses of hardcore party supporters, and less well in more diverse states. And last night's results just didn't shift that at all and didn't show him to be able to break out past his core supporters. So I would imagine that he stays in the race. There will be pressure on him to get out to the extent he's seen to be damaging Secretary Clinton. So far, he has not been attacking her personally very hard, and I think he'll refrain from doing that. He doesn't want to damage the eventual nominee, but it's very hard to see how he can catch up to her in the delegate count that will determine the eventual nominee.
Tonight is the 7th Democratic debate. It's going to be held in Michigan. What will you be looking for, Paul?
Well, I think more of the same. I mean, Sanders, as Luiza said, is reluctant to attack Clinton. She has been to Flint before, and I think one message we're going to hear, obviously, that is the city that's been devastated by this poisoned water thing. And I think both of them will talk about there's a Republican governor there, and there's an email trail that apparently shows negligence on their part. I think they're going to use issues like that to talk in broader terms about how Republicans have neglected minorities. Flint is a largely minority city. So I think we're going to look at things like that. I mean, Clinton at this point, I think, has such a commanding lead that she is pretty much dispensed with Sanders, I think. And she's starting to turn towards the November election, talking in more general terms. And I think we're going to hear talk from her in those terms tonight.
Always interesting. Thank you both very much. That is Paul Brandus of the West Wing Reports and Luiza Savage of Politico.